What's up, everybody? Just a quick little addition before we get into this episode. Uh, Basically, this is an episode where we're talking about, playing some retro games and how we're going to continue to go through and play all of the classic Resident Evil games eventually. And just before we get into it, I just want to say that if you wanted to play these games along, kind of like a video game book club kind of thing, Resident Evil 1, the original Resident Evil 1, is available on PlayStation Plus, and 2 and 3, you're probably going to have to get creative and, I don't know, go. If you can find your PlayStation Vita and it still has those games on there, you could probably do it that way. Or I mean, if you have them anywhere besides, I think PlayStation 3 and Vita both have those games on there. But 2 and 3, you can find versions on the PS1, the GameCube. I know 2 is on the Nintendo 64, and there are all kind of places on the internet allegedly that you can find those games. The next episode that we do this is going to be Resident Evil 3 and Resident Evil Survivor. So if you can find a way to play those games, you can play along with us, and we'll see you in that. Well, hold on, no, that's not right. Listen to the episode, and then we'll see you next time. What's up, everybody? Doug here, and this is not the episode that I planned on putting out this week. This wasn't an episode I planned on doing for a while, but we had some things come up where basically Thursday night we had an emergency, so we had to cancel the recording, and then Friday night Leo wasn't available to do that episode. So basically, we were gonna have a review and ranking of the modern Resident Evil games, which by modern I don't mean like modern. I mean the Resident Evil games in the RE engine. So that's Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 3 remake, and Resident Evil 8. And then at the end of this month, Resident Evil 4 remake comes out, and we're gonna hit that up. Uh, but the episode that we were supposed to be having this week was the Resident Evil 7 episode, but that kind of got pushed back because of an emergency. And I recorded an episode Friday, but the more I thought about it, the more I wasn't confident on putting that episode out. Uh, so instead, I'm going to take the original theme of what I plan on doing and do another episode here. But before we get into that, I've got just a few things to go over. First off, I signed all the paperwork. I sent it back. I'm going to be at the L Bar in LaBerge May 26th and May 27th from 8 to midnight. It's going to be a fun show. As far as I know, you don't have to pay anything to get in. You just kind of walk in. I'm going to be playing country music. If you like that, just come on out and hang out with me. As far as the podcast goes, we've got episode 0, which if you don't know what the show is, go listen to that. It explains it. And then there's episode 1, where I review the Dirk Bentley album that came out last week, Gravel and Gold. That episode has music in it, and basically, this time around with this podcast, I've been distributing through Anchor. And Anchor goes through all the podcast platforms, but the most important part of that is that on Spotify, if I release it on Spotify, I can put music into it. So episode 1 has a music and a non-music version. If you're listening on anything but Spotify, you're just going to see the non-music version. But if you're on Spotify, just kind of pay attention to what version you're on, because if you're on the non-music version, you're not going to hear the songs. But if you're on the right one, you're going to hear those songs, and it's going to be great. You're going to hear the songs I'm talking about. Uh, but let's talk about this one. This is episode 2. And I'm not on the ride home right now, so it's kind of not the title of the podcast, I guess. But we were hungry, so I'm going to Jack in the Box on a Saturday night, and the closest Jack in the Box is in Vidor. It's like a 20-minute drive, to and back, to and from. So who knows? You might hear me order some Jack in the Box, or I might pause it. Who's to say? But in keeping with the spirit of the episode that we were going to have, I've been getting in these moods where allegedly on the Steam Deck you can emulate games on there, allegedly. And since they're allegedly there, I like to play some old games sometimes. And about a year ago, I want to say, maybe 2, I had replayed the original Resident Evil on my Vita, because I found my Vita, and I think I still have it in this car somewhere. I can't look because I'm driving right now. But it's such a short game, and especially if you I've played the original Resident Evil so many times. I originally didn't even play it on the PS1. I played the DS port, the weird one. If you never played the DS port, it was they. I want to say there was two different versions of the game. There was one where it was straight port of the original game, and there was another one where it had some weird stuff in it, where like you'd walk in a room and like you'd have to swat away on the touchscreen with your knife to like swat birds and stuff away. And then I'm pretty sure on that DS port there was also some weird multiplayer mode where you could have your friend playing with you, but you didn't see them on the screen. You just saw like a little transparent green triangle going around the room. It was really weird. But I have started the original Resident Evil so many times, and even the GameCube remake that got remastered not that long ago. So many times I've played this game over and over and over and over again, but never got to the end of it. So when I pulled my Vita out of the closet, one of the first things I did was I fired it up and I was like, "This is gonna be I'm gonna finish this game," because I didn't have a Steam Deck yet. I think I did have my Switch, but I think the thing with that was that I didn't want because the Switch is a big console and the Vita fits in your pocket. So I think that was the deal with that. And literally, anytime I had any stretch of free time, I'd pull out my Vita and just start playing the original Resident Evil until I finally beat it. And that was the first time I'd ever beaten the original Resident Evil. So I got thinking about that last night, and I allegedly started playing the original Resident Evil 2, the GameCube version, and about an hour before I left the house to go to Jack in the Box, I beat the original Resident Evil 2, and a lot of people are going to say, well, did you beat both scenarios? No, I'm not doing that, because that this is going to be the theme of this episode. Resident Evil 2 did not age well. I know like all of the Resident Evil games didn't age well. Like the original trilogy and even Code Veronica and the Outbreak games, they all had those tank controls. Even I guess a case could be made for Resident Evil 4, I guess. But the the reason I don't think that Resident Evil 2 didn't age as well as 1 is because in 2 there are way more enemies that are very, very fast. Uh, and how I think we're going to do this episode is I'm going to talk about Resident Evil 1, I'm going to talk about Resident Evil 2, I'm going to rank those two games, and then I'm going to rank the villains of those two games, the main bad guys. And then every time I finish a Resident Evil game, we're going to just add on to it. We're going to add on to that. And whenever Leo and I get to, well, okay, here's what I'm going to do. Whenever I get to the point where I'm in the review, like I've gotten through, let's see, the last game before 7 was probably, I think Resident Evil Revelations 2 was the last game before Resident Evil 7. So how it's probably going to go is after I get to Resident Evil Revelations 2, I'm going to start to incorporate the ranking that Leon did. And then after that, it'll just go from there. But yeah, so the plan is I'm going to review all of these games eventually. And it's going to be in a series. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet. Doug's Retro Corner? I don't know. Sounds a little weird. But, this is just brainstorming. So we're going to start off with Resident Evil 1 and 2. Because I've played those two games. I just started Resident Evil 3. I'm going to play a little bit more, after Emily goes to bed later. Resident Evil 1 is, it started it all. And you can pick Jill or Chris. I always pick Jill. I've never played the Chris part of it, but when I get to the part in this series, when I get to Resident Evil 1 Remake, the GameCube version, what I'm going to do there is I'm going to do the Chris playthrough for that run. So we'll get that there. But Resident Evil 1 had some little quirks that I didn't know about. Like, I did not know that you could get through the game without the final boss fight with Tyrant. I don't know what I did. I just know that in the spot where you get on the roof and you're supposed to shoot him with a rocket launcher, I didn't do that. I didn't do that part at all. I fought him in the little underground lab, and then that was it. And the game's fast. The game's really well. I don't not fast, but I mean it's a short game. But and that's probably because I've played it so many times. Yeah, I've played the first half of that game so many times that I was like, okay, first thing I got to do, I've got to go right. I've got to go through the hallway. I've got to start finding keys. I've got to get the jewels. I've got to get the shotgun. Uh, but to get the shotgun, you have to get the fake shotgun. All that good stuff. All that good stuff. Uh, and the part of these games that don't age well is it is hard as a modern gamer. It is hard to hit these things. It is hard to. I want to say the one that I had the most trouble with was Yawn, the big snake. This thing, I got so frustrated with it that finally, there's a way that you can cheese the boss fight. I think if you just turn around and walk out of the room, you get away from him. And that's what I ended up doing because I couldn't hit it. And when you really get down to it, that's why I think Resident Evil 2 aged way worse than Resident Evil 1 did. Because the thing about Resident Evil 1, the only time where you have an enemy that's hard to hit, really, is Yawn and the Hunters. They can be a little hard to get rid of sometimes, but as long as you have a shotgun with the Hunters, you're probably going to be okay. Uh, but other than that, you just really have to deal with the zombies, and they're slow, and it's not really a difficult thing to do. Now, when we get a little bit later on in the series, when we get to the remake, we can talk about the Crimson Heads and how, it adds just this whole other layer of fear into the game. But Resident Evil 1, in comparison, is I just feel like it holds up a lot better because of the fact that it's easier to hit the enemies in that game. It's an easier experience on the player. And let me tell you, by the time I got to the end of Resident Evil 2, the OG one, I was so happy. And I have a feeling I'm going to feel the same way about Resident Evil 3. I still think that Resident Evil 2 is a better game than 1. That's just because when you really look into it, it's a better. I I think it's just a better game. Better game when it comes to the atmosphere. You know, both settings are pretty ridiculous. The mansion was ridiculous, but the police station is just stupid. No, there is not a single police station on the planet that is realistically designed like this because you've got doors with special keys from like cards on it. You've got, you've got all of these weird little puzzles. You've got the inventory room. You've got just the most. Can we talk about the clock tower? The clock tower is what really threw me for a loop. You go into the library that's on the second floor, and you go up the stairs, and you walk out, and boom, you're on the third floor. The third floor of a police station that has nothing there. It's just a pointless third floor and you go up one more, and there's this room. It's the clock tower, and there's a lot of gears in there. And the only purpose for this room is for you to get, I think it's the bishop piece. It's one of those little weird chess pieces. Uh, and yeah, it does. And this is one of the reasons I think Resident Evil 2 is better than 1. Because in Resident Evil 1, you're just in a mansion for 90% of the game. Like, towards the end, you get into like the little underground laboratory section of it. But for the most part, you're in a mansion. And 2, you're in the police station. You're in an underground lab. You're in a factory. You're in a sewer. And yeah, it's a bigger area. But at the same time, it's a good variety. Uh, you know, it's really the bosses are definitely cooler. You know, in Resident Evil 1, spoiler, we're gonna talk spoilers here. The villains in Resident Evil 1 are Wesker, and I guess you can, if you really want to elaborate on that, you have the Tyrant, which looks cool. Those are cool villains, but this was a surprise for me. I didn't run into Mr. X in the Leon playthrough. I don't know if that was, again, because I was talking about earlier. that in Resident Evil 1, I completely missed the final boss fight somehow. I don't know if that was the thing where he's not supposed to be in Leon's playthrough or if I just missed it. And the main villain in Resident Evil 2 is Birkin, who looks way scarier. He's got different forms. All the forms are cool except that last form, which can go burn in a hole. Uh, the forms are cooler, but the fact of the matter is there's not a good combat system to pair with them. And what I mean when I say that is going back to why I think the Resident Evil 2 does not age that well. The tank control system that they implemented in 1, which worked better in 1, doesn't hold up here because you're trying so hard to move and be fast to catch these enemies, and it's just a lot easier to miss. It's easier to get hit, which is why I think there are so many healing items in this game, and the enemy variety is just through the roof. I want to say, okay, in 1 you've got your regular zombies, you've got the dogs, you've got the crows, the hunters, the spiders, and I think that's it. I'm probably missing one, but I mean, in this game, you've got like 3 different types of zombies. You've got these little plant things that can attack you. You've got, oh, here's my exit. I'm about to make my exit. So busy talking about Resident Evil. You've got, okay, I said the plant guys. I said like 3 different kinds of zombies. There's 2 different kinds of liquors that I can think of, just off the top of my head. There are, I know Mr. X is in the game. I just know that he's like not as big as he is in the remake. There are spiders. There are no hunters. I don't think there are any hunters in this game. But then you've got Birkin, and you've got, I feel like, oh, the big alligator. The big alligator. I tried to kill it, and I don't know if you can because I put a lot of bullets into that guy. Maybe looking back at it, it's not that there's more enemies. It's just they're more interesting, because just the liquors themselves. I want to say about 3/4 of the way through when I was in the laboratory, there were 2 liquors that they got. Oh, dogs. The 2 liquors ganged up on me, and I couldn't do anything, and I was dead within a few hits. So I mean, they're scary. They're terrifying, and I think in every section but the gameplay, Resident Evil 2 is the better game. So I think that's where we're going to leave off with these two because that's the thing. When you get down to, oh, you know what? No, I do have a big complaint with the early Resident Evil games. The inventory system. And we're going to talk about the inventory system in just a minute. We're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to order some tacos. I will be right back. All right, everybody, we're back. I finally got the food from Jack in the Box. It took a little while, and I ordered something that was not. I was supposed to just be going for tacos, but then I just saw it. They have a sriracha fry burger, and I wasn't gonna say no. I wasn't gonna say no to sriracha. A burger with sriracha sauce and curly fries on it? Get out of here! I'm not gonna say no to that. Uh, but anyway, so we were talking about the inventory system, and when it comes to the inventory system, it's both the same, and I don't remember if it's the same in Resident Evil 3 or not, but God bless it. It's bad. It's so bad. I can't tell you the amount of times where I would get all the way, down a 5 to 10 minute trek, and this puzzle item that I hadn't used for half of the game just came back. Like, hey, you need the crank, or hey, you need the valve, and just stuff like that brings both those games down for me. That's just the last little thing I wanted to add in there. So, but before we leave, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna talk some rankings here. As far as the better game, Resident Evil 2 is definitely the better one. So the list right now is Resident Evil 1 at number 2 and Resident Evil 2 at number 1, which sounds just really weird. Uh, but the more I think about it, because Birkin's the cooler villain, but when you think of, I don't know, when I start to really sit down and think about a villain, I don't know if Wesker would be the better villain. I think I'm I think I'm gonna go with Birkin as the better villain though. Uh, I think because Wesker's cool and all, but he doesn't really do. I mean, he kills it. He does kill a few people, but other than that, he doesn't do anything cool. So I'm gonna leave that at Birkin number one and Wesker number two. So before we leave, uh, if you have a retro game series that you want to have me or somebody that works on this podcast put me play, just let me know and we'll look into it. We'll put it on a list somewhere. Uh, if you can the podcast, like the Facebook page, subscribe to the podcast, any app of your choice. You pick. I don't care. What else do we have here? Spotify. If you can follow us on Spotify, if you can listen to this podcast on Spotify, that helps us the most. Any play helps. Any play on any podcast platform helps. But on Spotify, if you listen on there, there's a little counter. If we can get to 100 listeners within a 6-day period, then we get access to sponsored ads. So that would be just fantastic. Other than that, I think that's where we're going to leave things for now. In next week's episode should be the Resident Evil 7 episode, so I will see you guys then. Thanks for listening.